The complete story of kidnapping girls from the
Jinn.
If you like exciting stories and unique content, don't miss the chance to watch this video. The story I'm going to tell you will have you excited from beginning to end. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and activate the notification bell to be the first to see everything new. Let's get more enjoyment and benefit together. Let's start hearing it together. If you like exciting stories and unique content, don't miss the chance to watch this video. The story I'm going to tell you will have you excited from beginning to end. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and activate the notification bell to be the first to see everything new. Let's get more enjoyment and benefit together. Let's start hearing it together. The Ghost of the Highway. I used to work on a truck, and I was one of those who preferred to work at night as the roads are quieter. As usual, I was on one of my assignments and it was approaching midnight and the road was empty of cars. The weather was good and did not portend any change. However, suddenly the weather changed and it started to rain heavily. The lightning was so intense that the road was lit and clear in a way that made me anxious. The sounds of thunder were terrifying and strong. With the fear and even terror that crept into me, which I did not know exactly what caused it, I was forced to stop the truck for a while. I tried to get rid of this obsession and the feeling that there was something suspicious happening around me, and after I calmed down a little, I started moving to resume the road, but I had barely moved from my place when I saw this light in the middle of the road, and upon closer inspection, I noticed that it was coming from a car blocking the road, and it seemed that it had been hit because its front was broken. I got out of the truck and started approaching this person sitting in a strange position next to the car, and I asked him what was wrong with him and if there was anything wrong with him, but I maintained some distance between us because the feeling of fear and anxiety was increasing from this strange situation. So he answered me that his head was almost killing him and he needed help. And he did not answer my questions and only asked for help while he was still in this strange position in addition to his voice that terrified me. I was filled with terror, but I did not lose my focus and started examining the car and the lights, and I noticed that it was not a car, but just the body of the car with headlights that resembled the headlights of a car only, and all my thoughts were focused on escaping from here quickly. Suddenly, his terrifying voice returned, which was filled with anger. "Won't you help me?" But my fear was strong, and I told him that I couldn't and that I had to leave. He stood up, but his head was still hanging down while he was talking. "But I need help." Here, his head rose, and I didn't know what this was because everything in his face was upside down. I didn't know until I ran to my truck and closed the doors on me. He looked at me from the truck window and ordered me with his terrifying voice, his upside-down features, and his terrifying smile to get out or let him in. However, I did nothing but one thing. I turned my truck on and drove off, and I didn't look back. And I didn't wait to hear or see anything or to find out who or what I saw and what its nature was. A couple living a quiet and happy life, but the only problem that was spoiling their lives was children. After several years of marriage, they were not blessed with children. Whenever the wife liked a doll, she would buy it and put it in the house, hoping that God would bless them with a child one day. The couple would go to work in the morning and return in the afternoon so that the wife could start preparing food and arranging the house, but it did not last long. One day, the couple returned home to find that the food was prepared with the most delicious types and varieties, and the house was also tidy and cleaner than before. The couple was amazed by what they saw, as they thought that one of the relatives wanted to surprise them and make them happy, but the matter was repeated more than once, every day. So they decided to tell their family and neighbors what was happening, and the surprise was that everyone denied any connection to the matter, so the husband decided to find out who did it. The next morning the couple left home for work, but 2 hours before the end of the workday, each of them took a leave from work and headed home. When they opened the door, the surprise was one of the dolls that the wife had bought was the one doing all the cleaning, arranging, and cooking. The doll was haunted, but things did not go smoothly. After discovering the doll, she brutally killed the couple. When the neighbors arrived, they found the doll lying next to the couple, burned and holding a kitchen knife. One day, I decided to visit some of my relatives, and because it was winter, I decided to go early to return early before sunset. I actually arrived at 3 in the afternoon, so I sat with them. I laughed with all my heart and had a lot of fun, but when it was time to return, I looked at the clock and it was past 1 after midnight. Oh my God. What did I do? I didn't realize the time. I gathered myself and ran out to see that the road was empty of pedestrians and cars. I didn't know how I would get home. I needed a means of transportation to take me, and unfortunately my relatives didn't have any. I looked right and left, but to no avail. Then I had to walk for about an hour to reach the car park. I had to pass by the dark, scary city cemetery. As I approached it, I began to recite some supplications and Quranic verses and took quicker steps. Then I saw from afar a group of people wearing white carrying a coffin and approaching me. I saw a woman carrying a small child with them. Oh my God. I closed my eyes and did not see myself until I was in the car park in less than the required time. I looked right and left. Finally, I sighed in relief. I found a taxi, got in it, and thanked my Lord. After this incident, I decided never to go alone to this area and to pay attention to the time as well. The story revolves around a family of 4. The father worked as an engineer in a company in the city and had great experience in his field. His wife advised him to look for another company with a higher salary, and here the search began. Because of the great experience the father had, he found another job, but its headquarters were very far from the house. For this reason, the family decided to move to another house so that it would be close to the father's new workplace. After that, the father began looking for a house at a reasonable price in the neighborhood adjacent to the company's location until he found a large house, but he did not believe the price that the owner of the house was setting, as its price was low compared to the advantages that appeared on it. The father did not hesitate to buy this house and moved his family to live in it after a short period. And at first everything seemed normal and life was calm, as the father was happy with the new company he was working for, and this neighborhood was better than the previous neighborhood he lived in. After a period of the family living in the house, the mother noticed suspicious events as she was watching her 8-month-old daughter, either laughing a lot without stopping or crying in panic and fear, but she was reassuring herself that these things are normal and happen to many children. A short time later, the son went to his mother and said to her, "Mom, I don't want to sleep alone anymore." So the mother said, "Why, my dear son?" The son said to her, "I started hearing voices as if someone was walking outside my room heading to my little sister's room," and here the mother reassured her son and told him that they were just hallucinations and not real. But what happened started to happen again with the son, and he started going to his mother every night and telling her until something strange happened. One night, the mother was sleeping and suddenly she heard her little daughter crying loudly and very loudly. The mother remembered her son's words and quickly headed to the child's room, but the big shock came when she approached the door of the room, where she noticed that someone was trying to silence the child and playing with her. The mother looked furtively through the peephole to see something terrifying. She saw a young woman in her 20s carrying her child. The mother stormed into the room and found her child alone. The mother was shocked by what she saw, but she thought she saw an illusion because she was asleep. The next night the same thing happened, so the mother was convinced that there was something suspicious happening in this house. The mother searched and asked the neighbors to discover a big surprise, which is that a long time ago there was a family living in this house, and there was also a maid serving in this house. One day, their little daughter died because of the maid's negligence, so the owner of the house killed the maid as punishment for this negligence. Here the mother realized the reason why the maid came every night to her daughter. She had also heard that the maid was wronged, but the owner of the house's anger at the time took control of him and pushed him to kill this poor maid, especially since the maid was known for her love for young children, and for this reason the maid did not appear to the son, father, or mother, but rather appeared to the little girl. After the father learned this whole story, he decided that he would not continue living in this house and that he would start looking for another house, even if it was at a higher price. The father then learned the reason behind the low price of this house compared to the rest of the houses for sale in the neighborhood, but that did not prevent him from moving to another house for fear of the ghost of the maid who appeared in his house every night. Not even a week passed until the family moved to another house in the same neighborhood and left their house in which the ghost of the maid lived. Kathy, who had just turned 14, and her family went on a trip to their grandparents' farm outside Montgomery, Alabama. The trip from Atlanta was long and boring, especially because of the hot weather. As soon as they arrived, the parents were busy arranging the country house, so Kathy and her sister, Nan, went out to walk in the forest and collect wildflowers. There, they stopped in front of a small cottage covered with plants and grass. The cottage was old and dilapidated, and its windows were broken. It seemed as if everything in it was already dead. As a result of a wave of recklessness that swept through Kathy's mind, she ran quickly to the cottage and stopped in front of the door, which was half open, and said, "Is there anyone inside?" But no one answered her, so she laughed because she was sure that the place was deserted. Kathy and her sister walked around the place. In the main room, there was dust covering everything, as well as cobwebs. There was a dilapidated sofa with torn cushions. As for the next room, it contained a kitchen with a small dining table with plates on it, and the chair was placed in the middle of the way away from the table, as if someone had been sitting on it and had left the place in a hurry. The two girls felt that someone was watching them, so they left the place quickly. Before they left the place, curiosity returned to overcome fear, which prompted them to return and go up to the second floor. Kathy opened a door to the left of the stairs and then exclaimed, "Oh, how strange." She was looking at an old but still beautiful copper bed with an old quilt that looked like it had received many different wild animals. Kathy stepped back, closed the door, crossed the hall, and went to another room. She opened the door and stood there in shock. Nan stood on tiptoe to see over her sister's shoulder. She saw a clean room with old, shabby furniture, but elegant, with no trace of dust on it. There was a carpet and curtains on the open windows. In the middle of the room stood a rocking horse. It was moving back and forth very quickly, as if a child was sitting on it. Then it gradually slowed down until it stopped completely. There was also a baby's bed with a rocking chair next to it. On the other side of the room was an old wooden chest. Kathy quickly went to it, and behind her, Nan knelt beside it, then lifted the lid among the old things. Inside, Kathy found old letters that revealed to her almost the identity of the owners of the cabin. Kathy read the first letter, and it turned out to be from the husband, who was a soldier fighting in Virginia. "I miss you so much and our little boy," he wrote to his wife. "What scares me is that I may not be able to get home to be with you." She put the letter back and picked up another letter. Kathy began to read it aloud but suddenly stopped, and tears began to stream from her eyes. Nan took the letter and read it. This time it was from a wife to her husband. "My dear, our son has pneumonia. The doctor was sent away with the troops, and I couldn't find anyone to save him." Nan put the letter back in the box and then took out a small piece of paper. It was a telegram from the army. It said, "Madam, we regret to inform you that your husband has been killed in action." For a few minutes, silence fell before a whirring sound was heard in the room, accompanied by a soft voice chanting a lullaby. Nan quickly put the telegram back in the box and closed it. Kathy and Nan quickly ran out of the room. As she ran outside, Nan felt something touch her arm. She looked around to find the rocking chair moving slowly back and forth, and the singing became louder. But that did not stop them. They continued running until they got out of the house. When they felt reassured in the woods and close to the house, Kathy did not mind taking a look back, and Nan did too. But this time the house was not deserted. There was a blond boy watching them from a second-floor window. The girls ran quickly through the woods, not noticing the scratches they had sustained from rubbing against the thorny wild plants. After they returned home, they told their father the story, but he said something that was even more terrifying. He said, "There was a house in the forest many years ago. Everyone knows its story, and it is exactly what they knew from the letters, but the story has more to it." After the wife learned of her husband's death, she left the place because it reminded her of her child and husband. But after a while, it became clear that the husband was still alive, and when he returned, he did not find his wife. He burned the house out of grief, and now there is no trace of the house. And indeed, the father took his two daughters and went to where Kathy and her sister found the hut, but they did not find anything but the wreckage of a house burnt. A woman says that she noticed a change in the behavior of her daughter, who is no more than 6 months old. This change began after they moved to another house. Her daughter was laughing and playing, and someone was making her laugh. Even when she cried, she would suddenly stop crying and start laughing. The idea of ghosts never crossed her mind, believing that angels were the ones doing this to her daughter, but one night she heard her little daughter screaming, so she quickly went to her. Near the child's room, the mother heard a woman singing a lullaby to children, after which the child's crying stopped. The mother approached her daughter's room more, then she saw a woman standing in front of the door. The lady says that she was able to see this strange woman clearly because she was very close to her. She was a tall woman with dark hair and wearing an old-fashioned dress, but she disappeared when the mother tried to turn to see her face clearly. Everyone in the house was asleep except her, as she always took a long time to sleep. Then she heard voices at the door of the apartment, which was very crowded, and around her were many neighbors and so on. It was not a deserted place, a very normal place. After these voices, she heard two people coming and dividing themselves into rooms in the house. She says that they had a dog with them, to the point that she wondered how thieves could take a dog with them. As usual, she pretended to be asleep so that no harm would come to her. At first, she was praying to God Almighty that these sounds were caused by thieves and not by supernatural things. She was peeping, but she felt the dog, which was black, standing next to her as if he sensed that she was awake, so she closed her eyes and then one of them came. Both of them were black as well, and nothing could be seen from them. One of them climbed onto a chair and removed one of the closet doors. The girl swore, because she remembers her story when she grew up, that she saw him do that, and then they left with their dog. She wondered at that time how thieves do not steal anything, but come to do it like this and leave. The next morning, she told her mother about the presence of two thieves last night, but her mother denounced her. Whenever she told her something, her mother would look at her father, and then a terrible silence would fall on them, and then they would tell her that it was just her imagination. The parents moved to a new apartment, and after that, the owner of the story did not see anything else. One day, the whole family was sitting together and exchanging conversations. The girl told her two stories with everything in them, as she never forgot them. Everyone, especially her father and mother, admitted that they were all seeing things that were out of the ordinary, but they were telling her so that she would not be afraid. Her mother also told her that she was seeing this child constantly, and not just once. The last part of the story. A true story of a girl who was loved by a jinn. The story takes place in the Hale region of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, where the poor girl lived with her old father, whom she was taking care of. One day, one of the sons of the jinn fell in love with her and pursued her until he possessed her, so her life turned into hell. She saw many nightmares in her sleep and saw that there was a jinn who was having sex with her and assaulting her during that. After a long period, gray hair began to appear on her in a strange way. Her father felt that there was something strange about her or that she was possessed, so he summoned a cleric to read the Quran to her. The man actually came and began to recite. What the father expected actually happened, but he tried to deny it until the last moment. As soon as the girl heard the Quran, she began to scream and her fingers clenched tightly, and the jinn began to speak on her tongue and send threats and intimidation to everyone who tried to approach her. Before he disappeared, he said, "I will go now, but I will return for her until I take revenge on all of you." That night, the poor girl slept alone in her room, and at midnight, he began the doors and windows of the room around her were shaking violently, and the curtains were falling around her, and suddenly the girl disappeared as the jinn had kidnapped her and fled with her to the mountains of Hale. 2 days after this incident, a security man passed by this road and saw a girl falling from the top of the mountain. He rushed to her and she began to say to him in a weak voice and with eager looks, "Water, water." Then she suddenly disappeared. The security man later mentioned that he was very surprised by the girl falling from the top of the mountain and that she was asking for water, and it seemed that she had been violently assaulted, as her beautiful clothes were torn. After this story spread, the Prince of Hale recommended a prize of 4 million Saudi riyals to whoever finds this girl, but no one has found any trace of her to this day. A girl tells her story, saying, "One day, one of the brothers came to me in the mosque and asked me to read some verses from the Holy Quran to his sister, who was possessed by a jinn. May God protect you," after he told me her entire terrifying story. His sister had been married 2 years ago and had not given birth until now. One day, She went to visit one of her neighbors and advised her to go to one of the magic healers. The sister hesitated a lot at first, but under pressure and a strong desire to have children, she listened to her talk and went to one of the magicians in the area. There, this magician gave her a stick of incense and told her that she must burn it in the bathroom, otherwise she would never have children in her life. The poor wife returned home and immediately began to implement this devilish recipe that the sorcerer had told her about without telling her husband. After several weeks, the girl felt a strange change in her personality traits: constant tightness in the chest, nervous tension, anger and panic without any justification, and disturbance when hearing the call to prayer or the Quran, to the point that she could no longer read anything from the Quran in her prayers. Then she began to get into constant quarrels and disagreements with her husband for the most trivial reasons, so the house turned into an unbearable fire. The girl went to her relative's daughter while she was in a state of extreme sadness, worry, and depression, unlike her usual state. Her brother began to insist on asking her about her condition and the secret of this depression and sadness that covered her face. The girl told him what had happened to her and about the ominous recipe that had brought ruin to her home. The young man began to recite verses from Surat al-Baqarah to her. As soon as he reached the throne verse, he noticed his sister's disturbance and the constant movement of her hands. Then she began to ask him to stop reciting, and her voice changed into a strange voice that he did not recognize. Here, the young man stopped telling his sister's story, saying, "That is why I came to you, my sister, so that you would go with me to read to my sister." So I advised him to go to one of the trustworthy sheiks who have experience in this matter. Indeed, the young man went with his sister to the sheik who treated with a holy Quran only, and the sheik discovered that this satanic recipe that the wife did from the beginning brought her the jinn in love, may God protect you, who tried to ruin her relationship with her husband because he loved her and wanted to take her with him underground. We often heard about girls disappearing without reason and not finding them after that in any way. The wife began the treatment journey with this sheik until she recovered completely and her normal relationship with her husband returned. The girl decided to publish the story so that every woman would learn from it and never seek help from these charlatans and sorcerers whose goal is, first and foremost, material gain, and they often cause very harmful damage that may destroy the lives of others forever. One day, my uncle came to our house, and anger was clearly evident on his face because he was unable to transport his goods in the warehouses to his wholesale store located in the village where I live with my family in Garbia Governorate in Egypt. At that time, the carts pulled by the Mar were the means of transporting goods in the town, and the reason behind my uncle's inability to on that day, he was transporting his goods. An accident occurred at the cart stop, which led to the death of one of the young boys who was driving one of the carts, as he fell under the wheels of a large trailer truck. My father tried to calm him down and advised him to stay in our house that night until the next morning so that he could transport the goods about my condition and what my grandmother says, but I did not disclose my suspicions to anyone, and the next night at exactly the same time we heard the hysterical barking of a group of dogs under the window of my room. I looked down and found a dog whose body was raised by its feet as if someone was holding it by its feet and waving it in a circular motion, but the strange thing is that there was no one at all. As for the rest of the dogs, they were wrapped around it in a circular ring and barking hysterically as if they saw something and wanted to attack it or were afraid of it. Suddenly, the events developed a lot, so I became as if I was inside a real horror movie. So on the third night, and at the same time in the middle of the night again, I was surprised by a hail of bricks and sand raining down on the window of my room, and these strange phenomena continued to appear for 3 consecutive nights, and as soon as I called my father, and we opened the window, everything calmed down, and nothing remained but traces of dust on the window because of the bricks and stones that rained down on it. An idea came to my mind, which was to try to communicate with this terrifying ghost that I was convinced of inside me. He was the old man of the dead child in the aforementioned incident, and indeed I turned off the lights in my room and sat behind the window waiting for his circumstances, or for him to make any movement that would indicate his presence. I began to address him, saying, "Why can't we be friends?" Suddenly, I found a little child's hand behind the window waving at me. I was overcome with fear and ran to my parents' room. Soon, News of the boy's ghost spread in the family, and our young relatives began to come to our house to see these strange phenomena that my father had talked about a lot. One day, my cousin was spending the night at our house and saw himself as a donkey's hooves knocking on the window and told my father about it. The next morning, all the house's belongings were thrown out into the street. Things got worse, and we decided to leave the house after everyone was convinced that it had become haunted by the ghost of the dead boy, or perhaps by a group of ghosts trying to expel us from the house. In 1947, many ships received distress messages from the Orang Medan ship. The first message said, "All the crew, including the captain, have died in the cabin of the ship." Then came the second message saying, "I am dying." The ships were unable to find the Orang Medan except for one ship called Silver Star, which was completely silent and covered with ice blocks and everything on it. Surrounded by an atmosphere of strangeness and mystery, they found the entire crew of the ship in a state of freezing, and they were spreading their arms and looking with fear and extreme terror at the sun. The strange thing is that they found a dog on the ship frozen in the same way and looking at the sky. The man who sent the two messages was also found frozen on the transmitter, while also looking at the sky. The story of this ship is one of the most mysterious and strange ships, as its crew of 8 people and 2 passengers disappeared. Captain Morehouse, one of the friends of the captain of the Mary Celeste Briggs, says that the last signal he received from the ship was that it had lost control of its course in a crazy way, which is what? It was completely inconsistent with Regis's sober leadership style, and after that, Morehouse completely lost contact with the ship. It was also said that the ship, which was carrying 1,701 barrels of alcohol, was found without any signs of a violent quarrel. It was also found with a food supply sufficient for 6 months, and that 9 of the wine barrels were empty. There were also signs of shipwreck due to bad weather conditions. The marine surveyor responsible for investigating this incident found some blood stains in the captain's cabin, the captain's decorative sword dirty, a knife, and a very large crack in the railing indicating the presence of a sharp instrument such as an axe, but he did not find any trace of it. Over the course of 13 years after the accident, the ship witnessed many tragic deaths. People expected that the icebergs had completely destroyed it after a terrible accident that this ship was exposed to, but in October 1775, it was found on the eastern coast of the island of Greenland in Denmark in a state of complete freezing, where the entire crew of the ship were found frozen and the captain in his hand with a pen writing something in the ship's log, indicating that the freezing was very rapid, was last recorded in 1762, which means that the ship had been frozen for 13 years. Captain Simon Reed decided to take a sea voyage to Portugal with his wife on his ship, Lady Lovibond, in 1748, to celebrate his marriage. A member of the ship's crew who had previously been in a relationship with the captain's wife wanted to take revenge on the couple by attacking them in a violent quarrel that led to the ship losing its course and disappearing in the sands of Goodwin Beach in England. 50 years after this incident, a ship was seen sailing in the same place of the incident heading to Goodwin Beach. Then, another 50 years later, some fishermen saw a shipwreck, so they sent boats to check what they saw, but they did not find any traces of this ship, and the Lady Lovibond became seen every 50 years. That night, around 12 midnight, my grandmother was standing on the balcony of our house on the ground floor, and suddenly we saw her running and screaming and swearing that she saw a cart running without a driver, and it was being chased by a group of dogs, more than 20 dogs. I could not stop my imagination from connecting the incident that happened and what he told me. Here we have completed our story. If you liked it, follow us and give us a comment.